American composer. It's 173. His technique of melodic lines colliding into each other was mined by Zappa for several of his own compositions. One such piece, titled Charles Ive, was played live extensively by the Mother's Invention in 1969. Maybe we'll play that later. 174, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, American Beat Generation poet. The only one of the Beats to be acknowledged by Zappa on the list, although we do know that Zappa was also notably influenced by the great William S. Burroughs. 175, Terry Wimberly, piano player for Zappa's high school R&B group, the Blackouts. In this integrated group, Wimberly was said by Zappa to have, quote, represented all the other oppressed peoples of the earth, unquote. His speaking voice can be heard on the track The Blackouts, released on the 1996 album The Lost Episodes. Johnny Franklin, alto sax player for Zappa's high school R&B group, The Blackouts. Later played bass in Zappa's bar band, which performed at the Village Inn in Sun Village, California in early 1965. Name-checked in Frank Zappa's song Village of the Sun from the 1974 album Roxy and Elsewhere. 177, Teddy Bunn, American jazz guitarist, husband of Thelma Bunn, owner of the Village Inn in Sun Village, California, where Zappa played weekend gigs in early 65. Teddy would play jazz guitar for patrons in between Zappa's sets. That's Teddy Bunn. 178, Jeepers, American TV character played by Bob Guy. Jeepers was the host of Jeepers Creepers, a Los Angeles area TV show which aired some of the god-awful B-movie horror films that Zappa loved. Frank Zappa wrote and recorded both sides of a single, Dear Jeepers and Letter from Jeepers, with Bob Guy at Pal, recorded with Bob Guy at Pal Studio in Cucamonga in 1963. Then the last guy, very important guy in Zappa's life, Paul Buff, who we saw a picture of, a videotape of him. Roxy and I both saw it, and he looked like Rumpelstiltskin. He really did look weird. And he's the guy, Paul Buff, the last guy on the list. Carolyn has a T-shirt she got from Jerry Fialka, which says, I know Paul Buff personally. And typical of Carolyn, she never fucking knew him. She never met the fucker. And so it's another lie brought to us by Dr. D, who's in another world right now. So we can talk about her. But it says, I know Paul Buff personally. We didn't know what he looked like. And then we turned out he looks like a little gnome, a Rumpelstiltskin gnome, at least in the last couple of years. So he went on to be a big important guy in Nashville. But he had this very advanced recording studio. So it says here, so then Carolyn is in a picture book, glossy New York book, with her T-shirt, and I called up Paul Buff, got a hold of him, and told him to go look at the book and see his T-shirt in this classy book with Sting's wife and other people of note. And the unknown Dr. Dean, who put her in there? Why? I don't know. 179, Paul Buff, American inventor, engineer, musician, flash lighting designer, and more. Personal friend of Frank Zappa. Gave the fledgling composer his first big break when he employed Frank at his pal recording studio in Cucamonga. Buff later sold the studio to Frank Zappa, who renamed it Studio Z. And it says, below the lengthy list of names, on the lower right side of the inner gatefold sleeve, so the inner album cover, is the track list for the album. Each song is given a brief explanation, which is by turns humorous. It says, for Hungry Freak's Daddy, that it is dedicated to Carl Franzoni, who Frank Zappa predicts, quote, will move next door to you and your lawn will die, unquote. Now, Carl Franzoni, as soon as Gail Zappa died a couple months ago, Carl Franzoni put together a video, a tribute to Gail, and for the first time, we see Carl Franzoni, or at least what he looks like today. And he talks about Gail being the prettiest girl in Hollywood and a great person. And he made a nice video of her with pretty good pictures, obscure pictures. A comment. Okay, Zappa, his songs, he put cynical. For the song Any Way the Wind Blows, in which Zappa addresses his divorce from Kay Sherman, he has You Don't Care, meaning the audience is cynical. Cynical or revealing is the characteristics of the liner notes Zappa makes for Any Way the Wind Blows. This track list is surrounded on either side by a collection of black and white photographs. Some of these were taken during the recording sessions for the album, including a very nice shot of mothers Roy Estrada and Elliot Ingber cutting backing tracks alongside the studio orchestra on the second day of sessions. And some photographs were added by Jack and Nash without Zappa's knowledge or approval, added to the album cover, which is not to suggest that these additions required Zappa's approval. They did not. Frank Zappa did not have the clout to insist on approval of the album cover art at this point. Particularly galling to Zappa was the inclusion of a shot of members of a group called the Enemies, who were signed to MGM at the time. He was also not pleased with a shot of songwriter P.F. Sloan, misspelled Sloan in the credit with an E, who was said to be testing the timpani at Freakout at the studio. On the plus side, one photograph featured members of the Freak contingent, referred to as charter members of the United Mutations of Los Angeles, including Emperor Vito and Crown Prince Carl Franzoni, who I just cited, making that homage to Gail. Included among these photos on the first pressing of the album was an advertisement for a Freakout Hotspots map, which could be obtained by sending $1 to MGM Records. The map, which was designed by Zappa, featured all of the freakiest places on the LA scene at the time, including clubs such as the Whiskey A Go-Go and the Trip, alongside eateries such as Ben Frank's. Unfortunately, not only was the map not completed by the time the album was released, but it would not be completed by Zappa until early '67. Later pressings would remove this ad altogether from the packaging. So, the first pressing of the album on it was an advertisement for Freakout Hotspot. Now, I have a copy of that. So, that's the end of that. Now, my job now is to find an interesting Zappa article that will illustrate our experience. So what will it just be serendipitous? I'll just open to a random place and find something by Frank.
Yes.
Let's see. This is a quote I make all the time. In the August 8, 1969 Los Angeles Free Press, that's J.W.'s birthday, Frank was interviewed. And the quote they have from it, he goes like this. He says, "It's all capital letters, it's all serious intent. I seriously intended to make that album sound exactly the way it sounds. And some people can't understand that you can seriously want to do something that's not serious. What we do and have from the very beginning is concept art. You know, like the real artistic merit of what we do does not necessarily exist on the disc itself." Now there's a clue to what conceptual continuity is. Not the contents, not on the disc.
That's also your opus magnus. It's like you're doing something very serious, but with fun.
Ian is totally that way. He did it again today. We got to get you guys out of here before you get killed, but be easy about it. We don't care if you die. It doesn't matter if you get killed.
We'll come back.
Now, we're not clear on the coming back. And it's still this whole thing of reincarnation and how people have many lives or not and still be the same person. That has not been adequately addressed by my opinion. Then he says, talking about who Roxy's supposed to get in touch with, Pauline Olivero, he says some of the ideas are below the level of human consciousness and some of them are above the level of human consciousness. And in the middle is this peculiar byproduct, which is the manifestation of what those ideas are. So that's a good quote that they picked.
Very good.
Right, so let's see what's next. All right, here's a good article. Circus Magazine, in July 1969, we saw in June 69, Circus Magazine had many quotes by Zappa, including his list of favorites. If you remember, he free associates: guitar humping, girl humping, woman humping, car humping, America no comment, L.A. police, New York police, teenager Coca-Cola, Beatles entertainers, today dull, tomorrow same thing only better, Gestalt something big, influences Edgar Perez, Stravinsky, Cage, Waters, Howling Wolf, The Nutmeg Explorer, Werner Smith, science fiction writer, and Theodore Sturgeon. So that was in the June issue of Circus Magazine. And the next month, probably recorded at the same time they interviewed Zappa, it says Rock and Revolution, a symposium with John Kay. Who was he? Steppenwolf. Was he Steppenwolf? John Kay, Frank Zappa, Phil Oakes, and Country Joe. And this is an important symposium. It's one of the few of Zappa talking to other people of his generation in a debate, semi-debate. Now, it's a long thing, but maybe it would be interesting just to register what each person says. What do you think? It's good, eh? Everybody's with me on this?
Of course.
So this is 1969. You've had, global turmoil in 68 and 69. Yeah, and so people, the fans of the Beatles are now listening to John Lennon and advocating revolution. So this is called Rock and Revolution. What do you predict Frank would say in this theme about rock and revolution? Do you have any? Can you make some general predictions of what his opinion is going to be?
Well, he was not against. I mean, he was not for revolution, not like.
Right. Those dumb kids, they wanted to take his 8,000-member audience and go around the corner and burn down the NATO building. He thought that was a sign of bad mental health. What'd you say about Castro? He did not support.
Not that type of revolution. He was into you changing your own environment.
Yeah.
And perfecting yourself, like the alchemist, but not like that type of revolution.
Not an ideologue. Don't get trapped into ideological program. Okay, so let's see what he says. The article says, as the traditional structures of... Now remember, the global theater is causing this, not humans. The mixture of TV, radio, computers, and satellites and other stuff is causing the collapse of all the walls. But this is just a typical teenage magazine journalist trying to sound intelligent. So he says, as the traditional structures of family, religion, and politics diminish in power and influence, it is becoming clear that music, specifically rock music, is emerging as the most inclusive and binding force among the majority of young people in America today. Rock music has the power to bring together what God, Mum, or apple pie can't. Secondarily as an entertainer, and primarily as a spokesman, and often the embodiment of a collective, and for now an underground system of values. The blacks, the poor, and the young have this in common. They look upon America as a country that is no longer theirs. They are ready for revolution, and the music reflects this. The Chicago Convention of 1968 seems to have been the ultimate traumatizing experience, which in one fell swoop brought all the loose ends together into a horrifying, clear vision of exactly how far gone things really were. Well, Bob was saying in 67, everything had disappeared. They didn't go that far. These people still think there's something to notice. In talking with the musicians, for this interview, one of the most frequently used phrases were, quote, "Well, at this point, I just don't know anymore," unquote. That was repeated over and over like a litany of bewilderment. You definitely know Zappa wouldn't be saying that. There exists a wide spectrum of opinion within the scope of their dissatisfaction, ranging from John Kay's advocation of strategic violence to Joe McDonald's insistence on peaceful coexistence. A common vein of anger and frustration runs through all the replies, the exception being Frank Zappa, who always seems to be equal to a situation, be it national, global, or cosmic. Zappa said, see, he's different.
Global or cosmic, wow.
Yeah. The quote to him, "Sure, it's bad, but that sure ain't going to stop me. Why should it?" Now, that's a major ionic statement. You ever heard one? Really? He says it's not going to fall on him. Sure, it's bad, but that sure ain't going to stop me. Why should it? Wow, isn't that an amazing statement?
Yes, and
yes.
He's beyond the global village when everybody was talking
yes.
about that.
Yeah.
he was already considering the cosmic and
the journalist says that Zappa
dimensional
is equal to a situation. The journalist says, always seems to be equal to a situation, be it national, global, or cosmic. Frank was bigger than Jupiter, like I said on CKLN in 1987. So the journalist says, well, we're gathered here on what's practically the eve of the Chicago Convention. But that's a year later. It's now almost a year later. As the dust, this means this is in August 69. As the dust clears, we find ourselves with Richard Nixon as president, and the Chicago conspirators, that's the Chicago 8, facing jail terms and fines. Somehow it doesn't seem as if things are getting better, or that there is much chance that they will. As musicians, whose work and very existence is often seen as being subversive in quotes, and as individuals concerned with making a place for yourselves within America, 1969, how do you feel about what's going down? Now, Phil Oakes, famous folk musician, who was in some ways equal to Dylan, but didn't have the same breaks, and was vulnerable. He got very depressed in the early 70s, and he killed himself in 1976. He's written about in Dylan's first girlfriend's book, A Freewheeling Time by Susie Rotolo. Recommend the book. She talks about knowing Phil Oakes. And when she saw him in the 70s, he just got more and more depressed and suicidal looking. So Phil Oakes is the first to answer. How do you feel about what's going down? He says, I don't know. I just see nothing but terrible things coming up. See, there he is, predicting his future. I see the Vietnamese War coming right home, and the same story being replayed here. I see an awful lot of people being killed here. An awful lot. I tend to think the country's going to be destroyed. I don't see how it could be saved. If it is saved, it's only going to be after some fantastic amount of violence. And out of the ruins will come a smaller, saved, in quotes, saved version of America. Hey, listen, I'm just going to mute you guys. Make sure no sound comes through. So, all right. So look at this. The questioner responds to Phil Oakes by saying, you mean like McLuhan's vision of America as a network of independent principalities? Which is a very good point that McLuhan made in the Playboy interview a couple of months before. So this kid would have maybe just read the McLuhan interview and noticed that. I've never seen anybody really highlight that prediction other than me. You mean like McLuhan's vision of America as a network of independent principalities? Oakes, quite a possibility, but I think the wounds run pretty deep. I have a kind of biblical feeling of moral reckoning, like by the laws of God and nature, it's just got to come right back to us. The proverbial day of reckoning. But at bottom, I really don't know. I mean, I used to. In my earlier arrogance, I always thought I had a clear, light vision of where everything was at politically, and so on. But now there's so much pure madness that it's very difficult to figure anything out. Now, that was back. That's a simple time compared to today, but they thought everybody was mad back then. And it was pastoral compared to today in many ways. So he says, but now there's so much pure madness that it's very difficult to figure anything out. So he's trying to judge the content. He hasn't learned his McLuhan talents for looking at the laws of form and not get lost in the confusing content. So then Country Joe McDonald, he says, I find it very difficult to find out where politics is at just at this time. So it's difficult to align myself one way or another. I'm doing my thing, and some of it is political. It always has been. Some of it is ambiguous enough to be related to the revolution, and probably will be. But it's not as overtly political as it used to be, meaning his own approach. St. Nicholas says, the beer is here. Question, what did Chicago do to your head? I understand you were there during the convention last summer. Joe McDonald says, we were really enthusiastic and really very naive right from the beginning. We were talking about it for 7 months before it happened, and at that time we were hoping for a kind of mammoth Love-In music festival. But in between, I got turned off McCarthy and found out he was really nothing, not even a hype, just nothing. A week before the convention, we publicly withdrew our support from the Yippies and split. Then Zappa comes in. Zappa says, there was a fire in the place we were playing at in Chicago. That was about a week before the convention. We were getting stopped by the cops. We had to buy them off right and left. So Zappa is noting how the police were really after long hairs the week before the convention. He had to pay bribery. That's literally how you take it. So then Phil Oakes says, after Chicago, this Great Depression came over me. See, and he never got over it. The new album, called Rehearsals for Retirement, touches on this quite a bit. That is, the idea behind it is the death of the old concept of America. The songs generally relate to that. The final death agony of the liberal electoral myth of politics. The album runs a kind of cycle. Like things are getting worse and worse, we get engulfed in paranoia, we turn to drugs or mysticism or meditation, and in that state the cops come in like a huge shock wave. Then Chicago, to try and salvage things, and democracy dies before our eyes, almost like a Broadway play. And then there are some rather mythic things like the song about the submarine Scorpion. It sank without a trace, and I got the idea that the captain and crew decided to stay down there because they got so disillusioned with life in America. Before Chicago, I was a long-time radical singer. I was supporting McCarthy, much to the criticism of the other radicals. I was at the conservative part of the radical movement at that point, and still trying to help create the yippie and the pig and everything else, plus supporting mobilization in terms of sober left-wing politics. It all came to a head in Chicago, and it all collapsed for me at that point. And he cites lyrics, Phil Oakes. This is called William Butler Yeats Visits Lincoln Park and Escapes Unscathed. Lincoln Park is where a lot of the riots took place in Chicago at the convention. So his lyrics say, the towers cracked and trembled, and the boats were tossed about when the fog rolled in and the gas rolled out. Ian talks about the towers and things trembling. The temple trembles. Oh, then there's a quote from the Rolling Stones, Street Fighting Man. Everywhere I hear the sound of marching, charging feet. Everywhere I hear the sound of marching, charging feet. Boy, 'cause summer's here and the time is right for rising in the streets. Boy. Boy, B-O-Y. So the guy says, what about violence? Do you see it serving a purpose? It certainly is part and parcel of the American way of doing things. McDonald says, I think violence is a self-destructive trip. If some guy thinks he can wipe me out and vice versa, we're existing in an atmosphere of paranoia. And in that atmosphere, we can never liberate our minds. And if we can't do that, our potential as a race is pretty much wasted. So then Zappa comes in and says, the chance for, pretty good length, the chance for a violent revolution in America is always there. There's always that many stupid people. I think it would be a ridiculous waste of time, a typical loser's revolution. Makes me vomit to hear the word. People don't know what a revolution is. Everything that they ever read, everything they ever thought about a revolution is completely irrelevant to this day and age, especially in the United States. There are more subtle ways to the altering of things. It's not a question of picking everything up and dumping it and starting over again. I simply don't believe that. There are a lot of good things about the way society is set up today. The main problem is education. The education of the people who elect those representatives. An uneducated mass cannot function in a democracy. You just can't make a rational decision about a governmental representative if you're voting for Smiler's clothes. If you're voting for Smiler's clothes. It's a question of being provided with inferior software. Their computing mechanism is just not supplied with the proper software to allow them to make the right kind of decisions. That reminds me of the imagery of the robots in his play, Captain Beefheart and the Grunt People. This is maybe what he's imagining. People, it's a question of being provided with inferior software. Their computing mechanism is just not supplied with the proper software to allow them to make the right kind of decisions. They compute a problem and come out with, well, you feed in 2 + 2 equals, and they come out with something like 75. I feel a particular promise, believe it or not, in short-haired kids from suburban middle-class families. The ones who never wanted to be hippies. Those are the ones who are going to change it. Right now, they're around 15 years old. The long-haired guys are too stoned to make rational decisions. They come up with answers to social and political problems that are just completely beyond their comprehension. I wouldn't want to have any part of a revolution engineered and executed by today's crop of young rebels, because they wouldn't have the faintest idea what to do after they took over. So that's kind of what Roxy predicted. Then it says, John K., there are many people who get stoned out of their minds and do a lot of talking. Maybe some of them are really doing something, even though they are misguided in some cases. Zappa has really, so he addresses Frank, Zappa has really taken too much of an opposite viewpoint, though, possibly because he doesn't get stoned. What he says is an oversimplification, mainly because drugs and long hair don't always go hand in hand. The suburban short hairs that he talks about are into as big a drug scene as anyone else. I do agree that there's a fringe layer that gets stoned out of their minds and does a lot of talking. Maybe some of them are really active, but it's a gross exaggeration to say that if you turn on, you become negated as a social or political force. I don't think that drugs do anything in general to everyone. Each person reacts in his own way. Some drop out and become totally unproductive. Others go through a cycle of getting disillusioned, dropping out, getting bored with doing nothing, and finally coming back into the system. Let me read that again. Some drop out and become totally unproductive. Others go through a cycle of getting disillusioned, dropping out, getting bored with doing nothing, and finally coming back into the system. Their heads are just as wide as when they were taking acid, but they want to be active again. I think Frank is wrong in that respect. What's probably closer to the truth is a conglomeration of people. Short-haired, long-haired, stoned, and so on. Actually, the ones who will really change the laws will be the law students in college now, and the people who will be voting in 5 or 6 years. So then, question. The journalist says, then, do you think that the existing political systems are pretty much irrelevant right now? Country Joe McDonald. Yeah, irrelevant. That's still necessary. But it's not the system that matters. It's the attitude of the people involved in the system. If they're out to get the best ideal for the rest of the people within that system, then that makes all the difference. But you can't just abolish systems. People need those structures. It's just the motives of the people running them that get corrupted. What has to happen is a global community. Actually, we are a global community. It's just a matter of realizing it. We're all depending on one another anyway. Zappa says, the biggest joke I ever heard was America described as a melting pot because none of it ever melted. Question, how about the normal channels of change? Elections, referendums, courts, the whole democratic process. John K. says, there's really no way to bring about substantial change through the regular channels. But demonstrations aren't going to do it either. What I'm saying is that frustrated emotional outbursts generally accomplish nothing except getting a lot of people busted. And what we're interested in is a positive end result. St. Nicholas goes, yes, the tailbone end, woo-wee. I guess he's just some guy who's eating the food that was delivered. So then there's a quote from The Mothers of Invention, the song called The Mother People. It says, do you think that my pants are too tight? Do you think that I'm creepy? Better look around before you say you don't care. Shut your fucking mouth about the length of my hair. How would you survive if you were alive? Something little person. How would you survive if you were alive? Sexy little person. Maybe it's that. Okay, the journalist says, how do you see your music in relation to kids in America? John K. Depends. They all have varied opinions. Some of them say that you're just saying something they felt anyway, which in itself is good because everybody needs a support or a crutch. Everybody needs a support or a crutch. You know, quote, aha, there's another one like me, unquote. There are others who differ with you, and some who wish you to express yourself in a more shocking manner. It all varies, but very few of them have no reaction. The music is thought-provoking. I'm more concerned with the young kids who have no exposure to very much of anything, rather than the kids who are going to be at the Fillmore this weekend. They can go almost any weekend. They know all the groups. The kids in Iowa or Montana get very little of the rock scene, and so they're ready to grab at anything and dig the hell out of it. So there's more. Zappa says, it's a different thing with young kids. They should be aware because they're going to have to take over the duties of the old people. They're prepared to learn, and they can accept all those changes. The old people are simply hardened in their ways. But most of the boys and girls of America are the same as the mothers and fathers of America. They're just little carbon copy duplicates. They think the same thoughts, and they act the same way. They'll eventually belong to the same political party. They're going to take up They're going to take up right where Mummy and Daddy left off. In order for the ones who have been able to save themselves from that fate, in order for them to continue and do good work, they have to be shown that somebody appreciates the fact that they escaped. We appeal to those people. We let them know that anybody can create their own spaces within the world. John Kay says, precisely. Wait a minute. Did you realize that was Zappa? I tuned out. He says they think the same thoughts and they act the same way. They'll eventually belong to the same political party. They're going to take up right where Mummy and Daddy left off. In order for the ones who have been able to save themselves from that fate, in order for them to continue and do good work, they have to be shown that somebody appreciates the fact that they escaped. We appeal to those people. We let them know that anybody can create their own spaces within the world. So, that's Frank, and John Kay goes, precisely. That's why they look for the underground press and rock as a medium. Then we go there and perform, and the kids come backstage and ask us questions, trying to find out if we're really sincere in what we're doing, and if we have any suggestions as to their particular dilemma. They want to identify with one another as some sort of organization where they know they are part of a movement. It's the old thing. There's safety in numbers and power in numbers. I think in some cases, although I can understand the frustration, it's too early to go out and change things violently. I feel it would be a lot better to use that energy to get more people on your side, rather than some of the activities that are now directed at overthrowing certain things that you're disenchanted with. Question: what about kids? Do they seem any different from the people who you grew up with? Country Joe McDonald says, well, there seem to be more and more of them. They always were there, but not so noticeably. They're expanding their perceptions and consciousness to the point where the concepts of reality and the structures that go with it are constantly being torn down and enlarged. John Kay comes in and says, the kids that are 12 to 16 that are living in the Midwest and the South are in that adolescent stage of development where they would like to survive and be individualists. A lot of them shuck school, parents, church, and whatever other influences they've had. However, a lot of them don't. It's extremely important to recruit them right now so they don't wind up sitting on the fence and are on our side. Quotes Revolution 1 by the Beatles. You say you want a revolution. Well, you know we all want to change the world. You tell me that it's evolution. Well, you know we all want to change the world. But when you talk about destruction, don't you know that you can count me out? Or in. Someone put in out-in. So the journalist asked John Kay, so what are you going to do? John Kay says, I'm as confused as the next guy as to where it's going to go, and what we're going to do, and what it's going to solve once we do get, and what we're going to solve once we do get there. But one thing that I'm definitely for is change. I'd rather take the risk, says Zappa, of finding out that it may not work out than to just sit back and accept what is here and now, because I'm definitely not pleased with it. I'm radical to a degree, and I do believe that the time for nonviolence may be over. But on the other hand, I think it's somewhat silly to take a few thousand isolated people and push them into a violent action that is supposed to produce change. If you don't really have the support of a large number of people, I don't think you can accomplish very much. Zappa says, I like the idea of allowing things to happen. And that idea is in quotes. So he's coming after John Kay for putting him down. They had to give equal billing photographs to people. And check my... No, nothing there. Okay.
Yes, Commander.
Yes, the kids in Iowa or Montana get very little of the rock scene, and so they're ready to grab at anything and dig the hell out of it. That is what the know-nothing John Kay says. He's always saying, well, I don't know nothing. Zappa says, it's a different thing with young kids. They should be aware, because they're going to have to take over the duties of the old people. They're prepared to learn, and they can accept all those changes. The old people are simply hardened in their ways, but most of the boys and girls of America are the same as the mothers and fathers of America. They're just little carbon copy duplicates. They think the same thoughts and they act the same way. They'll eventually belong to the same political party. They're going to take up right where Mommy and Daddy left it. They're going to take up right where Mommy and Daddy left off. In order for the ones who have been able to save themselves from that fate, in order for them to continue and do good work, they have to be shown that somebody cares. The fact that they escaped. We appeal to those people. We let them know that anybody can create their own spaces within the world. So John Kay is telling Frank to carry the load. I've heard John Kay a couple times, but I don't know what he was doing there. He's a professor, I think, nearby university. So he is not articulating what he objects to Frank. Now, we still have the rest of the article. Let's see what it says. So, as Zappa says, we appeal to those people. We let them know that anybody can create their own spaces within the world. Kay says, precisely. That's why they look for the underground press and rock as a medium. Then we go there and perform, and the kids come backstage and ask us questions, trying to find out if we're really sincere in what we're doing, and if we have any suggestions as to their particular dilemma. They want to identify with one another, have some sort of organization where they know they are part of a movement. Okay, so are you still there? Everybody here? Hey! Oh, did I mute you? Okay. Are you still here? Maybe it's for... Who's here? Okay. Are you anybody?
Yes.
Who's that? Okay, that's Bert.
Bert.
And Roxy, did Roxy drop off again? Not here.
She should be on your line. I heard her.
I know, and then she's not there now, so I got to phone her back. That's that. All right, so mingle among yourself, Bert. Oh, where's Alyssa? Which one's Alyssa? Where is she? There she is. Is that you, Alyssa? Listen, you just rustled the paper? Somebody there. That's the stranger. It won't speak. Maybe Alyssa went to sleep. Yeah. Okay. I will... So you'll have to talk to yourself, Bert. Maybe do a little monologue. Let's see if you can handle monologue, Bert. Discuss your issues with the audience while I go get Roxy. Bert, did you hear me? Oh, shit. I unplugged you. Bert, how could you talk to yourself if I don't unmute you? So you can go ahead, Bert. Address the world. Did I screw up, Bert? I didn't get the right one? So where are you, Bert? Are you here?
Yes.
All right,
you
that's you. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
You're there. Now I'm saying, do a monologue for a minute while I go get Roxy. Tell the people what you really think. Be honest for once, Bert.
All right.
All right. And I won't be hearing you, Bert.
90% of all crimes that are taking place corporately are due to magnesium deficiency. There was an article that we discussed 2 weeks ago regarding was Tom Hayes running the biggest financial conspiracy in history, and on the first page of this yo-yo androamine discussion, they state that Tom Hayes had Asperger's syndrome. And if you look at what Asperger's syndrome is, it's some form of autism. It's an autism spectrum disorder on a severity scale. But apparently this guy could work. So it's a form of magnesium deficiency, because if you look in what's going on in the magnesium world, some forms of autism can be treated with magnesium. And if this guy could work, and he did this massive scheme, by the way, the article that article that Bob mentioned about was he running the biggest financial conspiracy was just an Android meme putting a face to the whole scam. If you read the whole article, it gives you a whole, like a yo-yo journalistic view of what took place, of what he did. But if you read the clues, they just put a face to the conspiracy that the bank he was working for and all the banks who were collaborating, they just put some names and faces and sent them away to jail. So I say again, 90 to 95% of all corporate white-collar crimes are due to magnesium deficiency. Also, Dr. Dean in this blog, also... you heard it. Good.
I agree.
No, it is. I mean, I read that article, and it gives you like a yo-yo, Android meme yo-yo journalism. Because looking at Bob's chart, you see all the different quadrants, and when I read this article, it gave you so many different views that at the end you really didn't know. You only believed that this Michael Hayes committed this crime, but if you read between the lines, it was a collaboration of so many different levers, the brokers against the traders, it was a whole big scheme. But he did do it, but he was not alone, and the banks had to allow him to do that because of his position. It wasn't like he was like Jesse James or Bonnie and Clyde, where he was just all of a sudden wanted to take over. I mean, the banks were paying this guy money, but in the end, he had Asperger's disease, which is sort of like a personality, kind of like they characterize him like he was like the Rain Man. But if you look at Asperger's, it's a form of autism, but apparently it's a form of autism that people can walk around and function within the workplace. But also, Carolyn posted on her blog, I'll keep bringing it up, but there was a PBS special, Supplements and Safety. And I listened to this video, or I listened it once and watched it, and it's sort of like the visual version of this article I read with Tom Hayes, is that they give you so many different views, but they have so many, they have like authoritative figures, doctors, and the stuff that the doctors were talking about was just unbelievable, talking about supplements and how if... One thing that was interesting is they made a statement that 15 attorney generals were going to make action to bring more reform, and they actually brought reform where they shut down like 100 different supplement agencies due to lack of regulation. And then it was really just a quick Android meme yo-yo journalism. They covered so many things, but it's just bullshit. Unbelievable how they're talking about supplements now. Unbelievable. But, of course, the supplement companies are run by, the Carlyle Group, so it's playing, the middle playing against both sides, because you have the pharmacy and then you have the supplement companies, which are becoming they're just the natural synthetic version of vitamins of what they used to be. And I remember Bob talking earlier about the medicine. We were talking earlier, the subject was about the medicinal part of flowers or food or something. So that's, if anyone you want to get an example of the Android meme yo-yo journalism, that Supplements and Safety that Carolyn posted on the blog is really something to listen. It's unbelievable. unbelievable what they're trying to poison. Well, they've already poisoned, but you're just propagating against supplements and minerals. That's my monologue. Wow.
Yes.
That was awesome. That was very good, Bert. And did you read the Tom Hayes, whatever his name is, article that I mentioned? You went into in depth. Read the whole thing?
Yeah, I read the whole thing. I read the whole thing. It was unbelievable. He did it, but it's the Android meme. Just they had to put a face to the crimes that the banks committed.
Pretend they were still humans.
Yeah, human. Yeah, human. Yeah. But in the end, he has magnesium deficiency. He has that Asperger.
Right.
Autism.
Yeah, that's good you read it all, because it
works and function, but
it's quite interesting the dilemma the guy got put in. He was the king of the hill for a few minutes, and then they needed a scapegoat, and he was maybe an isolated guy, perfect for. Nobody cared about being friends of his or anything.
Right, and they scooped him up. It's almost like he was set up, but that whole LIBOR is really sophisticated. It's a really sophisticated transaction.
Yeah,
like
what did you? You're in the business. What could you tell me about that I might not get? Since you deal with some aspect of that financial trading, what did you learn about the LIBOR or about how it was this fulcrum position?
Well, it was because it was one of those transactions that's done between the banks, and it was really a big transaction in the mortgage-backed securities industry. A lot of different tranches that they set in the bonds they used as the LIBOR rate, and the LIBOR rate was actually a behind-the-scenes transaction that all the banks agreed, which if you read that, how he connected all these different brokers and all these different banks to actually play. The one thing that I found interesting, but I wouldn't want to spend a lot of energy investigating, is how the connection of the fall of the market, which really is the dollar is what drives the market, but he was playing in the Asian market with a different currency. I didn't understand that, so that was kind of puzzling, because the LIBOR, apparently what I learned is the LIBOR is used on all different currencies, and for my exposure, but I guess it's possible, but I've only dealt with the LIBOR against the dollar, but that article, they was talking about he was manipulating the Asian market with the Asian currency. So or maybe he was manipulating the Asian market using the dollar. I don't know, but it's really just, a lot of that Wall Street stuff is just like sophisticated Las Vegas trickery when you go into those type of things like LIBOR.
You have to be working in there. You have to be doing it.
Yes.
You have to know the daily involvement that you're working with, and then find patterns. Now, he discovered this pattern that the top decision makers were letting it ride, and the middle guys had the potential to decide what the LIBOR rate would be daily. And nobody was watching these middle guys. They saw an opening.
Yeah. It also shows, I thought it was cool when I was reading that, because that's the perils of specialism, because a lot of that whole banking thing is full of specialists. There's very few guys that actually have the full view. It's only a specialist. He only does this, but he has no idea what his work or what he does connects to the whole big picture. And as a janitor, I'm able to put a little more lines together how things work, but it's because I don't care, really. So it's easy to do.
Did you say
but it's really
you're able to put more lies together? Or lines?
Lines together. I'm putting lines or patterns. I'm actually able to see more patterns than the specialists in the industry, because I worked where I used to work in the mortgage-backed securities industry, and here I've into hedge funds and all those kind of things. So but it's really specialist. That's what I picked up in that article, that it's the peril of the specialist. Also, Bob, there's another thing in there that I learned is that apparently that Wall Street took over, I remember in 2000 or 2001, they had this Sarbanes-Oxley rule, some type of, due to Enron. When Enron fell out, they came up with this law called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and that's where any officer of a bank had to sign some type of waiver that they could personally be prosecuted if anything in the documents that they signed, there was anything like that went cross to what was in those documents. And I used to I was an officer at one time, and I had to sign it. So when we did documents, I had to sign it. And it kind of links you to anything, like if you're doing, your name is on a fund, the Sarbanes-Oxley, you could be prosecuted. And that's what I took from Tom Hayes, because he was like, he became a head of this area, so he was like personally responsible. That's why they were able to put him in the guillotine.
Right.
Even though it's an international bank, but it seems like that Wall Street kind of like transparently used the same rule, that they make these guys officers and heads of these departments, so that if anything goes down, they can pull a name out of the hat and throw him over the coals as a
You mean
human.
They have people in specialist roles, and they're ready to be a Lee Harvey Oswald if the higher-ups require it. In other words, you got a regular job
Yes.
like that. You're being set up. You potentially
Yes.
could be set up.
And that's how they fished him out. I mean, they really fished him out, because, I mean, a lot of that, all those transactions, all they had to, because it took them a year, I think a year or 18 months, I don't remember the time frame, but because of how sophisticated that LIBOR is, you have to do all those connections of all those bank transactions and the timestamps and everything. So they probably, tested some new type of back investigative software to see how all that connected, and his name popped up. Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm just speculating.
But you had the feeling through that article of being present at something you had no awareness of. It was an eye-opener of some part of the virtual economy.
Yes. I mean, they gave a few, there was a couple paragraphs in there where it was some people saying there's no way that he did this alone. There was a couple, it was like point, counterpoint, all throughout the article I picked up. But basically he did. I mean, one time they made a mention that he made $700 million in a week or a month or whatever, but, that's a sign. I'm like, okay, so they're making the insinuation that he earned that. Well, actually, he earned that for the company.
Yeah.
He didn't take home $700 million. I mean, maybe he got a nice bonus out of his work, but he didn't take $700 million home.
No.
So it's just all, it's all connected to Carolyn's work and magnesium deficiency. Most people who aren't on the complete informers, they would be doing a white-collar crime like Tom Hayes.
Right. They'd be happy enough not to require the excitement of it, or the guilt of it, or the stimulus of it. They'd recognize, well, if I go there, negative pH is going to get me.
Yeah.
Okay, very good.
And also,
Bob,
I watched it. Yeah, good. Okay, good.
You watched what?
Carolyn, in her blog this week, released these supplements in safety by PBS, and that's, oh man.
You watched that?
Really a big, it's a joke. I watched it, I listened to it once through and then watched it, and it's really an Android meme, yo-yo, guys and ties telling lies.
It's based on people, maybe younger people, who don't remember anything before 2010 or something. They have no history. They don't know. It's all new to them. A new problem.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I wanted to snap.
And they can start to run the old shit, all the old arguments again, because nobody's around to refute them as they were 15, 20 years ago. Carol's like one of the last people who's super informed. I mean, there's a lot of, quote, responsibility in Carol's hands. she's the only one who's comprehensive enough to fucking explain all this stuff and not get trapped in one of the reactive subcultures, but knows and remembers what did happen and knows how ridiculous they are.
Yes. That's what's amazing about just hearing that. It's like, I've been taking vitamins and supplements for 40 years, and to hear this at this point, it's like we are definitely in the Matrix, and I am in Zion looking at the other world, because I could not believe some of that shit that they were saying. I could not believe it.
Yeah, they were saying, well, we all know the main supplement users are people like Bert. Bert, this white guy who pretends he's black, and he hangs out with Dobbs, who is a black guy, but pretends he's white. That's how fucked up what they were saying, right? They were describing you backwards.
Yeah, yes. Backwards. It's I mean,
Bert, he died. He suffered from a vitamin E overdose. We all know that.
Yeah.
With 60-minute investigation.
Vitamin D. Yeah. Oh, man.
Roxy killed him. Roxy, another fucking supplement asshole, fucking went nuts on her magnesium and killed 5 Ionettes. This is how absurd.
You killed the evergreens and everybody.
And Bob, forget that guy. He's been killing people for thousands of years. They still haven't caught him.
Ion said you killed everybody you talk to, so I'm getting
I
worried.
killed off the Knights Templars. But that's what it's like.
Don't kill us.
Yeah. But yeah, then another guy said, well, I was killed by Bob, and he's such a lousy killer, I survived it. I'm trying to say the most absurd things. That's how absurd they were, right, Bert? It was like hearing people say that kind of stuff.
Totally absurd. Totally.
Yeah, I have to stay sane in the midst of this and keep Carol in fucking balance, because Carol can get. It's just getting too fucking ridiculous from Carol's point of view. There's not a sane person around anywhere.
No, not at all. Yeah.
Yes, that was my job is just to be sane amidst the chaos of you specialists. You specialists crash and burn all over the place. My job is just to maintain diplomatic immunity. All right.
No,
okay,
that's really
That's right. Now, what did I fade out? I was reading Zappa, and we know. The John K. Yeah, he's saying, I feel a lot better to use that energy to get more people on your side rather than some of the activities that are now directed at overthrowing certain things that you're disenchanted with. So then the journalist says, what about kids? Do they seem any different from the people you grew up with? I don't remember saying that, so here's where we are. Country Joe McDonald. Well, there seem to be more and more of them. They always were there, but not so noticeably. They're expanding their perceptions and consciousness to the point where the concepts of reality and the structures that go with it are constantly being torn down and enlarged. John Kay says, the kids that are 12 to 16 that are living in the Midwest and the South are in that adolescent stage of development where they would like to survive and be individualists. A lot of them shuck, I think I read this, but anyways, a lot of them shuck school, parents, church, and whatever other influences they've had. However, a lot of them don't. It's extremely important to recruit them right now so they don't wind up sitting on the fence and are on our side. Then I was going to quote the Beatles, The Revolution. I didn't quote that, did I? I think that's right where I got. You say you want a revolution. Well, we all want to change the world. You tell me that it's evolution. Well, we all want to change the world. But when you talk about destruction, don't you know that you can count me out? Then it says dash in. Don't you know you count me out?
All right.
You grew up with that. That's one of your anthems.
Yeah.
Revolution 1.
No, my parents like the Beatles.
Ah, the Beatles. They like the Beatles?
Yeah. Yeah.
They grew up with their parents as Beatles. Holy shit.
say you want a revolution.
She grew up with it pounding in her brain. No wonder Roxy was yelling at 7 years old. Why? How? What? When?
Parents have such a bad musical taste. Why?
My parents are lousy music consumers. Why? Please release me from this.
Yeah, but I always like that.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that was a good one.
All right.
All right. Okay. So, I don't know who's putting these Beatles quotes in here. It's just, they're suddenly there, but I don't think they're put in and volunteered by the interviewees, but maybe by the journalist. So the journalist says, so what are you going to do? I remember saying that. I read all that, didn't I? I'm sorry, it's only a little bit left, so I guess I'll be repeating. So what are you going to do? John K., I'm as confused as the next guy as to where it's going to go and what we're going to do and what it's going to solve once we do get there. But one thing that I'm definitely for is change. I'd rather take the risk of finding out that it may not work out than to just sit back and accept what is here and now, because I'm definitely not pleased with it. I'm radical to a degree, but I do believe that the time for nonviolence may be over. But on the other hand, I think it's somewhat silly to take a few isolated people and push them into a violent action that is supposed to produce change. If you don't really have the support of a large number of people, I don't think you can accomplish very much. And Zappa says, I like the idea of allowing things to happen. Allowing things to happen in quotes. What better statement against fascism? I believe that all different styles of life can exist peacefully side by side if people allow other people to be what they are. Now, McLuhan would come in and say, social identity is based on violence. So for people to be what they are, they have to make an identity, and they have to be violent to make an identity in some way. So you couldn't be what Zappa's talking about. You can't have people existing side by side peacefully because they require identity making, which is violent. So the only solution is to realize there are no humans, no identity is possible, and start from there. A little help from Ion, maybe. But, so, Country Joe McDonald says, well, what it really comes down to is making myself happy. As for social behavior, if you're hurting anyone else, it's probably wrong. And that's why the social problems can be solved in the context of the mentality of the world today. The leaders systematically exclude gigantic portions of the human population as being radically different from them, which is entirely a false concept. We have a tendency to involve ourselves with our own kind, or what we think is our own kind. Like hippies mixing only with hippies, blacks only with blacks, students only with students. And this creates incredible myths and misunderstandings. So he's saying everybody is the same. The leaders systematically exclude gigantic portions of the human population as being very radically different from them. Then Phil Oakes is going to kill himself. He's the most depressed. He goes, I really don't know. I wrote a new song, which I sang at the rally after the Carnegie concert, called, quote, All Quiet on the Western Front. And one line runs, quote, I think I'll join the National Liberation Front. And that's sort of my feeling now. I suspect that after Yippie, it might be healthy for some form of new political group to come onto the scene. Now, he was in the village with the formation of the Yippies. I guess he got very disillusioned with them. That's Paul Krasner, Dave Dellinger, the guy who ended up working for the little Maharishi kid, Abby Hoffman, and Jerry Rubin. So he knew all these guys, but he's pissed off at them. He says, we need a group which is more sober rather than more crazy. In other words, a real national liberation front, whose purpose is to liberate America. Totally broad-based, which could take into its ranks the Kennedy people and the McCarthy people and the dissatisfied street people. But they'd have to really be together to get it together. And not only in America. I think a whole series of national liberation fronts throughout the Western countries would be a healthy development. A very heavy militant coalition of interest, able to include all sorts of people. All right, so then McDonald ends, Country Joe McDonald, I recommend compassionate action. To be compassionate today is the most revolutionary thing you can do. To act in a compassionate manner is the most revolutionary thing you can do, repeated, It eliminates almost all acts of violence and forces upon you a responsibility for the rest of the world. So, is there anything we can learn from this, Palmer? The yo-yo journalism, up and down, left and right. Too much violence, not enough violence. Too many stupid people, not enough stupid people. We need to get the young kids. No, the young kids are idiots. Well, and Zappa, sure he sounded the sanest in retrospect. I like the idea of allowing things to happen. What better statement against fascism? I believe that all different styles of life can exist peacefully side by side if people allow other people to be what they are. Well, that's a little non-cynical. Must be a misprint. He probably didn't even say that. The only way I can handle it. How could Frank be so stupid and naive?
What he was always saying.
Well, he was a constitutional conformist.
He was a what? What did you say, Roxy?
That he was always complaining that he was misquoted, and they would say he said things that he never said. And
yeah. I have an interview here. What are we going to do when I finish doing the Zappa stuff? What's next? I guess I'll play those valuable clips of me and Ion the last couple of days, or yesterday. Is there anything else we have to do? It's too much to do McLuhan, I think. What do you think? Do we go do the next McLuhan?
Yeah. No.
You'd rather hear what Ian says. Okay, well, we'll play. I got to play McLuhan, and Bob, Ion, and then the final, second, penultimate part of the rewrite. But there is this one pager. It says, Zigzag Unzips. Frank Zappa interviewed by Dick Lawson at the Royal Albert Hall. So he's in England. So I guess this is in 68. Wait a minute here, 68. This is... I don't know. Let's start half of it or something. So this is, I guess, 1969, because he's talking about Beefheart. Over the last year or so, you have been thrust by the press into a position where you are an attitude spokesman, that's in quotes, for what is happening in the States, which is presumably why you were asked to lecture at the London School of Economics the other day. Well, we know that was in August 69. What exactly happened? Now, what's interesting is this is what Zappa was in 68, 69. Like he wrote that article for Life magazine, he was asked to be a figurehead, a rational communicator. So the British are noticing this. Zappa says, I wound up speaking to a large number of unfortunately misdirected young people. Who were you expecting? Something political and sociological to come up? I gave them something political and sociological. The only problem was it didn't agree with what they thought the tactics for a youth revolution should be. And I can't buy their tactics because I think they're juvenile. So this is the thing we were laughing. I laughed my head off, laughed into absurdity last week. This is him dealing with the same German, the impossible Germans. Then the journalist says, they were sort of trying to bring the Berkeley thing over here. Zappa says, yes, much in the same way as they imported flower power. Journalist, in September 67, when you first came over, you were shouting things like flower power sucks, when half the audience had flowers behind their ears and were cringing in their seats. Zappa says, well, I don't think I really made them cringe, because when a person's really into that, he believes it for as long as it's fashionable, and the problem with young people today is that they're not much more developed than their parents, you know. Their attitudes are slightly different in some regards, but the level of their individuality and their sociological development is only slightly better. And they are not, as they imagine themselves to be, the spearhead of some fantastic revolution that's going to turn the planet into some kind of Garden of Eden after they're done, because they're not. The main problem with what they advocate in terms of aggressive revolution and waving signs around in the street and boycotts and violence and all the rest of this stuff is, A, it's a fad this season, And B, they don't offer any alternatives or anything better to replace the current situation with when they get done with their revolution. They don't offer any alternatives or anything better to replace the current situation with when they get done with their revolution. They're into revolution on a carnival level, and they aren't thinking in terms of the best things for the most amount of people. You know, they aren't taking into consideration the millions of people who probably don't want to be hip and groovy. They just want to be comfortable and sit around in their homes. And, you know, I don't believe that it's my place or anybody else's place to tell them that they're not entitled to that. It seems to me, so then the journalist says, it seems to me that you are not very choked off. No, it seems to me that you got very choked off playing and talking about this kind of thing, because you've come through Freak Out and Absolutely Free into Uncle Meat, 3 albums, where, as you say, it's basically an instrumental thing. I mean, you're much more concerned with the music itself, the jazz. It is jazz, isn't it? Zappa says, no, it's not. Well, what is it then? It's contemporary American music. American because that's the environment that created it. Los Angeles and New York. Now, I never saw that statement before. That's pretty neat. Is it jazz? No. What is it? It's contemporary American music. American because that's the environment, Roxy's word, that created it. Los Angeles and New York. Then the journalist says, well, in fact, with Reuben and the Jets, it would make one think that any spare time you have, which can't be much, you sit around listening to Del Vikings and Gladiolo's records and 50 stuff like that. Zappa says, well, as a matter of fact, I do listen to those sort of records because I have a large collection of them. But I listen more to Stravinsky and Perez than that, you know, almost to the exclusion of all other forms of pop music. The journalist, you don't listen to any of your contemporaries, groups and so on? Zappa, outside the groups that I'm producing during the time that I'm working on the project, no, I don't. You've recently befriended Captain Beefheart. Zappa says, I've known him 12 years. Ah, well, you appreciate he's a very big cult figure over here. Zappa says, I think they're in for a very big surprise as to what Captain Beefheart is into and where he's at. Because the 2 albums that you heard over here were, I think, extremely bad produced. And Beefheart himself has complained about what they did to him in the studio when he made those 2 albums. Because the first album, it was studio players backing him up to a certain extent. And the second album mixed in a way that was against his wishes. There were certain things that he wanted to have in there, and the producer took it into the studio and put that phasing effect all over some of the stuff and turned it into a piece of shit. And there were some interesting things on that album. I think the song Beetle Bones, Smokin' Stones is really a great song. We sing it on the bus. But the new album that he's just made is a 2-record set, and the roots of that music are in Delta blues and also in avant-garde jazz, like Cecil Taylor, Thelonious Monk, and John Coltrane, and a lot of other things. You can really hear that influence, and it's perfectly blended into a new musical language. It's all his, and it bears no resemblance to anything anybody else is doing. And his words are also, you know, like, quote, miles ahead of the field, unquote. Blended into a new musical language. So this is when he's a manager for Captain Beefheart in the fall of '69. You don't find those influences influencing your work? Zappa goes, those jazz figures? To a small degree. Journalist, I would have thought that Ian Underwood's alto work. Zappa cuts him off and says, well, we got to remember that when Uncle Meat was recorded, Ian had just joined the group at that time, and he had been working with jazz groups in New York, and it's pretty much in an Albert Eiler type vein. And that type of music still influences some of his playing, but it's foolish to, every time you hear someone improvise, to assume that it's jazz. One of the main problems we've had all along is making people realize that you can improvise in any given set of themes or chords or basic rules. I mean, is John Cage's music jazz? Much of it is improvised. The journalist says, okay, if that is what you were doing
that is interesting, because he's saying many people say jazz is improvisation music, and he's
saying no, other musics have improvisation.
Yeah, and rock can have this a lot of improvisation, and that doesn't make it jazz. Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so the guy says, okay, if that is what you were doing when Uncle Meat was recorded, which was in '68, Zappa says, Uncle Meat and Reuben the Jets were recorded simultaneously between October '67 and February '68. Well, what sort of stuff are you into now? He says, electric chamber music. And that's what you're going to play tonight? Yes, quite a bit of it. That's what we've been doing on the tour, and some of it's quite new. In fact, 5 of the pieces were written on the plane coming over, and we've been rehearsing them in our hotel with just the bassoon and the flugelhorn and the clarinet. Journalist, so in fact you're introducing new instruments as well? Zappa says yes. What was your reaction to the festival audience last year? Zappa, I was surprised they didn't catch on to what we were doing quicker. They didn't catch on at all, did they? No, they didn't. They missed the whole point of it. And another thing that's not generally known is that that show cost us $5,000 just to get those musicians to record it, film it, get the costumes, make arrangements with the hall itself to put on that kind of a show. It cost us money to do that. But I thought it was worth it. We recorded a very good album out of it, which will be our next record out around July. Then the journalist says, I read in Downbeat that you did a 45-minute set with Roland Kirk at a Boston Jazz Festival. Were you billed together, or did you just play together because Roland Kirk was there? Zappa says, we were on the same show, and I met him after he had done his part, and I said, quote, would you be interested in playing with us, unquote? And he said he didn't know. And I said, well, you've never heard the group before. You don't know what we do. If you like it, come on out on stage and start playing, and we'll back you up. So, end of quote, end of that part of Zappa's story. Then he says, so we played for about 5 or 10 minutes, and he came wheeling out there with horns hanging all over him and blew his brains out. It was completely free, nothing planned. No, the journalist says, it was completely free, nothing planned? Zappa says, no, he just came bopping out there and we did it. Have you got any plans to record together? Well, he asked us to, but we haven't gone ahead with any special schemes yet. Then the journalist says, recently Kirk came over and played with Jack Bruce, Steve Stills, Buddy Miles, and so on, in what many saw as an attempt to revitalize the group scene here. Did your getting together have any effect over there? I didn't, Zappa says, I didn't see that our meeting had anything to do with revitalizing any group scene in the United States, which was very sterile to begin with. But people form groups basically in order to get a hit. There's some evidence to the contrary. There seems to be a bit of creative work going into it, but there aren't many really creative groups in the United States. Beefheart is certainly an exception, and maybe 1 or 2 others. So then the interviewer says, what do you think of Billy Mundy's group, Rhinoceros? Billy Mundy used to play drums for the Mothers. Zappa says, I saw them live in Canada and was very impressed with this one thing they did called chickens. But the rest of what they were doing was pretty smooth, teeny-bop type material. These were tunes they were getting ready for their next album. And this piece, Chicken, sounds extremely like the Mothers of Invention, which is why I like it. What do you think of the group scene over here? Have you seen any? Zappa says, only what I saw down at the Speakeasy a couple of times, and I wasn't, exceedingly enthralled by what I saw. Journalist, what about the groups that we're currently sending over, like Jethro Tull and the Nice? He says, I like Jethro Tull and the organist in the Nice very much. I think he plays very well. I also like the Rolling Stones. What about specific states groups? I don't pay that much attention. There's probably lots going on, but I get pretty involved in my small corner of it. Who else are you recording apart from Beefheart? We have Wildman Fisher, a group called Alice Cooper, Judy Henske, and Jerry Yester. We just bought 20 hours of Lenny Bruce tapes. We have Lord Buckley. The police did him under in New York a few years ago, and he was a sort of strange type of comedian. Definitely underground comedian of his time, which was the 50s. We also have a documentary album on the Kennedy assassination, the last one, which is very interesting. Got all the actual tapes of the assassination, interviews with Sirhan in his jail cell, interviews with the witnesses telling what they testified in court, and what the police told them to say. Interviews with the witnesses telling what they testified in court and what the police told them to say. How did you manage to get hold of all that? Frank says, a guy named Doug Moody put the album together and offered it to us, and we packaged it and put it out. You were quoted as having Tim Buckley. Is it in fact Lord Buckley? No, we are going to have Tim Buckley as soon as his contract is up with Elektra, and that'll probably be September. The journalist says, well, thank you very much. Give our love to Captain Beefheart. All right, so we did that. Nobody's on mute. You can speak.
Yeah, that was very interesting.
Yes.
To hear what he thought about other bands and what he really liked. And
yeah, I've never read this before. It's a good, particular interview. talking about, I never heard the idea about the improvisation before from him. I didn't know that's how he distinguished jazz.
Yes, and he's not saying I'm a rock musician. He's saying I'm making contemporary American music.
Right. He says, what did he say that?
When he says, how would you define that? Because he says he's making jazz, and he said, no, it's
oh, yeah, that's
American
right.
Music.
He says it's not jazz. Well, what is it then? It's contemporary American music. American because that's the environment that created it, Los Angeles and New York. That would be the car culture of L.A. I don't know what it would be in New York. So, yeah, he's saying he's making contemporary American music. He's not even putting himself in any group, which is pretty unique. Pretty good.
And it's true. I think his music goes beyond the boundaries of a rock band.
Right.
He had more like an orchestra than a rock band.
Okay, let's see where this gets us. This is an interview with Zappa in a film magazine called Take One. I think it's a Canadian magazine. And it says, Uncle Meat, the latest LP, so this is in 69. We have a date on the cover. Volume 2, number 2. So there's your 22. On the cover it has Alfred Hitchcock staring at Zappa. Dated, the postmark, July 28, 1969. Okay. Uncle Meat, the latest LP by the Mother's Invention is described on the album cover as, quote, most of the music from the Mother's movie of the same name, which we haven't got enough money to finish yet, unquote. In a booklet that comes with the 2-record album, Frank Zappa, founder of the Mothers, writes, quote, this film is stashed away in my basement while we scheme on how to raise $300,000 to finish it and make it spiffy so it can be shown in your local teenage neighborhood theater. This is an album of music from a movie you will probably never get to see. And the journalist says, so, though the film is still uncompleted, some of the outtakes have been shown at the Fillmore East during a concert by the Mothers. Recent plans calling for a 14-hour unedited version of the film to be screened in New York with the audience paying according to how much film they'd seen. Between sets at Toronto's Rockpile Club, Zappa was interviewed about his career as a filmmaker by Take One associate editor Joe Medjuk. Joe Medjuk also interviews McLuhan around this time, produces a very interesting interview, which I read last week. I read about him making a film, remember?
Yeah.
So, what's the date of that? I mean, does Zappa and McLuhan coming together pretty much the same time? Pretty interesting. I have to find that take today sometime. I mean, that interview. Okay. So the interviewer, Joe Medjuk, says, presuming that the people who are going to read this won't know anything about Uncle Meat, what would you like to tell them about the film? Frank says, Uncle Meat is a surrealistic documentary about the whys and wherefores of our rocking teen combo. How long is it? It's probably about 2 hours. How much of it is completed? We've got about half done, I guess. Are you shooting in 16 millimeter? Well, the stuff that I've already got done is in 16 millimeter, but I need about $300,000 to finish it off. I have to shoot some stuff in 35. Any chances of getting it distributed that you've heard of? Well, I think that rather than show people little pieces of the way it is now and let them get the wrong idea of what it is, I think I'm going to have to find another way instead of hyping a distributor beforehand. Are you shooting it yourself? I shot some of it myself. Another guy named Ed Seaman shot quite a bit of it, and another guy named Don Preston shot some of it, and other parts were like confiscated German news film, calling it German. Did you use sync sound? Some of it it's wild and some of it didn't sync. No. Some of it's wild and some of it's think. How did you learn how to use a camera? I've been using a camera for 12 years. Could you say a bit about the plot of this movie? It deals with the conflicts that face an average middle-class sort of person who works for the government and does a bunch of things for the government that he's not proud of and can't tell his family what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
So...
Like his father.
How is he like his father?
Yeah, his father
description.
could not be proud of what he was doing, and...
No, I don't know what you mean. What do you...
Yeah, Frank's father was involved in some experiments.
Right.
I mean, he could not be proud of what he was doing, like he's saying there.
So your point was...
that
he's describing his father.
He was thinking about his father. Yeah, that he knows.
Well, there's nothing in what I read that indicates that it's his father.
No, but his father was in that situation that he could not be proud of what he was doing.
Right. Okay. Well, where do I say that? I didn't read that, but we've talked about it before, right? This interview so far...
What did you say it?
I said it right...
You just read it something. With that description, Bob.
Oh, yeah, right, at the end. I don't remember reading this. Did you use think sound? Some of it's wild and some of it's think. How did you learn how to use a camera? I've been using a camera for years. He didn't answer there. He didn't answer. Could you say a bit about the plot? It deals with the conflicts that face an average middle-class sort of person who works for the government and does a bunch of things for the government that he's not proud of and can't tell his family what he's doing. See?
Because I said, like his father.
That's right, yeah, I see that. Because he's doing a top-secret project for the government. You see, if it gets quite complicated, in the album Uncle Meat, part of the plot is printed in a book that comes with the record set, and it would be better if you just take it out of that. Now, I've been thinking of reading this booklet to you guys many times. I don't think I read it, did I? This story.
No.
Well, they make a small copy of it. I don't know if I can read it, but I could try. But let's finish the interview. So, what's he saying here? The government's not proud of... Does a bunch of things for the government. Okay, that's his father, right? Doing a top-secret project for the government. D gets quite complicated. In the album Uncle Meat, part of the plot is printed in a book that comes with the record, and it would be better if you just take it out of that. Then the interviewer says, how would you compare it to other people's films? Would you consider it revolutionary, or... Zappa says, I won't say it's revolutionary, but it ain't like the Beatles movie. Do you mean Lester's Magical Mystery Tour? Zappa says, ain't like any of them. So he's irritated a bit, or pretending to be. And he says, it ain't like the Beatles movie, and then later he says, it ain't like any of them. Are there any directors whom you'd consider influences? I don't know anything about other directors. Did my phone buzz? Getting low. Yeah. But we're okay, I think, to finish this. Or maybe not. I got to read a little bit. All right. I'm going to put a segment of refreshment on for a minute while I get the other phone. Okay? You guys can't handle that?
Yes. We'll survive.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What is it? You wanted Bean to Kansas. We didn't do that, did we? We didn't do the Kansas request. Bert.
No.
And
Perfect.
because
no.
we
did.
Yeah, we played other movies, right? We got distracted. There, so go and
Did the
other.
Who is Fucanelli?
What about that? Yes,
That's what we played first.
Yeah.
Who? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
What? Who?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm information overload. I don't know what's coming or going. But I was going to play the song and I lost it. Like, what is it? The one you wanted?
Kansas City in A minor.
Okay. Well, here's Charles Ives. He said that Charles Ives, 19th century, early 20th century composer. What do you say about Charles Ives? Do you guys remember? He said he likes his stuff or something.
Mm-mm.
That has to be one of the greatest fucking performances of music in human history. Holy shit.
So good. Wow.
Holy shit, man. It's like, you can forget. There's so many great things in Zappa land. You can forget great things. You don't hear them. You hear them once every 5 years. You stumble into the other room. Jesus Christ, you guys were playing. Very good choice there, Bert. Glad you remembered it. Of course, there's Billy's other great things, but that was phenomenal, eh?
Yes.
Wasn't it? Am I mistaken?
Yes.
Am I exaggerating?
No.
Have I not listened to enough Beethoven?
So,
What's a young mind like yourself, Alyssa, think of that?
So good. It's so, like, it's amazing. I mean, like, technically it's amazing, but it's how all the pieces are coming together that's so wonderful.
It's so muscular. Like,
it's a total environment.
Must be very... What? Would say
Total environment.
Right. It's a total environment. And to me, Zappa's playing so aesthetically and violently with his guitar. Like, he must be like a Superman. Very strong in the arms, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Or strong fingers or something. This sounds huge. And he's got these great horns. These fantastic horns going along. It like, I don't know if anybody knows where they're going. They just saw wailing. It sounds a bit like it's chaotic.
I was
but
thinking.
Not.
Yeah, but that comes from all those hours and hours that they rehearse, and they go into a concert and they get to a certain chord or whatever, and then whoever's turn it is to improvise, they just go to a whole nother level, and the band follows them. It feels like that. It's amazing.
Okay, Bert, I want you to sit down, Bert. I'm going to have you sit down because now, Roxy, you still here in my phone? Is Roxy still here? Did she get dropped off?
She was.
Okay, maybe this is her. She often waves. Is that you, Roxy, with the waving hand?
yes.
What do you think of that music? Was it as good for you as it was for us?
Yes. Very nice. Jazzy.
You made it. Now here, you just heard Bert say it's years of rehearsal. If I'm not wrong, this is what's called the petite wazoo, not the grand wazoo. When I was in England in September '72, we saw the grand wazoo, big orchestra. He probably took a small number of those guys and did 5 concerts around New England, and it's called the little-known Petite Wazoo Tour. Now, maybe they rehearsed for the Grand Wazoo Tour, but these guys were session people. They weren't Mother's Invention. I don't know how long they've been with him, but they basically had not been fucking rehearsing like you're talking about, we know about the traditional band.
Wow.
Yeah. They are accomplished session musicians. They can adapt, but I don't know how much rehearsing went into this. That's like, I think it should be a national anthem or something.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's just recovered from his accident, from being kicked off stage. He's still in a wheelchair when this is happening. Leg brace kind of thing. Yeah.
So he's playing the guitar in a wheelchair then.
I can't remember. There are pictures of him around the band in a wheelchair, but I can't remember him if he was in a wheelchair in London. And this would have been a few weeks later, late September, early October. I remember him limping around or something like that, But there are pictures of him in the wheelchair around this time. So he's just getting out if he has. He's just got off the chair. But he's coming out almost being killed. And what's funny, I was looking at there's been all this commentary going on in the chat line. Volumes of stuff. People asking me questions about things we were saying 3 hours ago and that I didn't even know about. Like, the great minds are being ignored if they're just typing. They have to come out here if they want Bob's value response. There's just too much going on. People are arguing over fucking things. There's like more than one show happening here in terms of audience participation. But, boy, that was quite exciting. It would be incredible to be Zappa and to play like that. What do you think of that, Lissa? Wouldn't you like to be able to get up there and play a guitar like that with those musicians?
Yes.
What happened to Alyssa? She drop off? Yeah, I think she dropped out.
No, she dropped out, but...
Yeah. Well, I think we better go to some recording. But that was a good suggestion, Bert. I've got it written down as Beam to Kansas, but that's not the title.
It is. That is the title. I have a list of songs, and I just remember Kansas City and A minor.
It must be Beam to Kansas City.
That's why
It is. I checked YouTube. It is been to Kansas City in A minor.
So what were you going to say, Roxy?
I just had some words.
Yes, that when I hear some of the pieces by Zappa, it's hard for me to believe that people say they don't like Zappa, because from the musical point of view, it's amazing in every aspect. Every aspect of the composition.
I agree.
It's simple little man envy. It's fucking envy and not allowing themselves to realize what can be done. They're blocking furiously and allowing themselves to know that such thing could exist. It's much like people's reaction to me. How could they not like me? Or how could they not like iPods? Everything I offer cannot be disliked. You can't dislike McLuhan. You can't dislike Croker or Phineas Wake. It may be challenging. Or Joyce, yeah. It may be challenging and upset your whole life and make you feel depressed and useless, but it's still not something to be disliked. You're confusing your personal silly response to a work of beauty. Just because it makes you feel tiny and inadequate and stupid, you should hate yourself, not the artist. But I like that, Roxy. That's right. I marvel that every day, twice a day. Why are people not praising this?
Right.
Well, it should be a national anthem. It'd be accompanied. I don't know. What would a 10-year-old kid today, if they could see that band doing that, what would they think? Would they be too whacked out from their tactile texting interplay to even hear anything? Would they notice it? Too busy, like Sarah's kid Noah, too busy running their own talk show to notice what Frank was doing.
Yes, everybody's into their little productions.
Producer mania. Trying to keep up with the Android memes.
Yeah. Taking selfies.
Selfish? Yes. Yeah, selfies. Did you say selfish?
Selfies.
Oh, taking selfies. Oh, my God. Jesus. Yeah, it's B for Kansas City in A minor. So he's been to Kansas City. It's a funny title. It's a virtual Kansas City. It's a place in A minor. So let's finish this interview. I made an incredible discovery in this fucking movie interview. I can't believe it. But I have not read this in 40 years. Now look at that. It's fucking half a century, man. I mean, This is like, I don't know. It was in the 60s. Somebody showed me footage for the 20s. I said, well, what are we looking at something from the 20s for? That's a fucking long time ago. This is how far away these interviews are. I've turned into a fucking ancient museum.
No, it's going to turn out that this is connected to the Chambord Castle. That article.
Yes. All right. So we're at this point where he said it deals with the conflicts that face an average middle-class sort of person who works for the government, does a bunch of things for the government that he's not proud of, and can't tell his family what he's doing. Holy shit, I totally forgot that's his father. See? Because he's doing a top-secret project for the government. See? He goes, see? It gets quite complicated. In the album Uncle Me, part of the plot is printed in a booklet. Would you consider it revolutionary or what? He says, I won't say it's revolutionary, but it ain't like the Beatles movie. And the journalist says, do you mean Lester's Hard Day's Night or Magical Mystery Tour? Zappa says, ain't like any of them. Are there any directors whom you'd consider influences? Zappa says, I don't go to the movies, so I don't know anything about other directors. It's like, he knows a lot about music, but it's another case of, well, I built this fucking dome, but I don't know how, I know nothing about architecture. It's an incredible movie.
He always said, I don't read anything. I don't go to the movies. I don't listen to anything.
He's the original producer mania. He's who is he making stuff. He's the only successful producer maniac who actually knows nothing but then creates unbelievable stuff.
Yeah.
I don't go to the movies. I don't do anything. I know nothing. He's so confident about his own making. He's just making what he wants to make. But he has a message. He's trying to show synesthesia or something. You know, he knows what his message is. He doesn't give a fuck what anybody else's message is. I like the way Rocky says, he doesn't do anything. You know nothing about music, doesn't listen to anything, never had a coffee, never had a hot dog. He's an alien. Never slept. I don't sleep. I don't know anything about sleep. So the guy says,
eat ice cream and go to the beach.
Yeah. I live on coffee and cigarettes. So the guy says, when Zappa says he knows nothing about others, he doesn't even know there are such thing as directors. I know nothing about other directors. He says, the journalist says, I heard a rumor that you almost did the music for Barbarella. And he says, well, we were playing in London about 2 years